Hello children, welcome to the new academic year. So today we are going to learn the subject biology, and today we are going to see the first lesson and what are the topics in it. I will going to explain in detail. So let us go into the lesson. So today we are going to teach all about the different types of species that are present. So imagine in your own environment, what are the organisms that you can see? The living organisms, the trees, plants are there. You can find birds, dogs, cats, lizards, cockroaches, human beings. So in our surrounding itself, so many organisms are being visible and we can see them. So imagine in a forest, you take a place and see. There you can find many types of trees. In trees itself there are many types of trees. In climbers you will find many types of climbers and different types of flowering plants that we don't even know, and many small creatures, the animals, they all will be very different. So imagine in this earth how many organisms are being there. So there are millions of organisms that are known. Still there are some organisms that we don't even know. So what it looks like, what is the name of the organism, likewise. So today you are going to learn about how these different organisms are present, how many organisms are present, and what are the studies based on the different organisms. So the lesson is an introduction to biodiversity. An introduction to biodiversity. So you are going to learn about biodiversity. Biodiversity is nothing but, like I told you now, if you take a place, you can find various organisms. Likewise, if you take the whole earth, imagine how many organisms are present. So identifying them and naming them. So those are only called as biodiversity. So bio means all the living organisms. It may be plants or animals or human beings. Diversity means different type of living organisms are called biodiversity. So studying about biodiversity, this is a huge study field. Now we are going to see biodiversity. What is it and what are the things involved in biodiversity? So, like I already told you, the number of species that are known, there are many unknown also. So, the known species are ranges from 1.7 to 1.8 million. 1.7 to 1.8 million organisms are known organisms that are present on the earth. So, imagine how many organisms are there in the whole earth, and this is known as biodiversity. Like I already told you, living organisms, different types of living organisms are on this earth. So that is only is called as biodiversity. Imagine 1.7 to 1.8 million organisms. So these are only called biodiversity, living organisms, different living organisms. The number and types of organisms on the earth, present on the earth. So this is known as biodiversity. The number and types of organisms present on the earth. So on the earth, how many types of organisms are there? How many number of organisms are there? So studying about that only is biodiversity. So studying about the number of organisms and the type of organisms are known as biodiversity. And there is a need to standardize the naming of living organisms. So we should standardize, we should make proper steps to name any organism such that the particular organism is known by the same name. So if any organism is there, a particular organism, you can take parrot, you can take. So the entire world, everywhere, wherever the parrot goes, it has to be called with that specific name. So for that we need to make some changes to standardize. we have to name them properly so that wherever they go, they have to be called by the same name. So that is what is said here. And all over the world. So wherever we go, we have to, it has to be named the same. So this is known as nomenclature. So when any organism, our name will be given to that organism. The whole world will use the exact same name. That is only called as nomenclature. Nomenclature. And nomenclature or naming. So naming one organism. So that name will be used all over the world. That is only nomenclature or naming of organism is possible only when they are described correctly. So we are seeing one organism. We are seeing the dog. So we have to describe it correctly. How externally it is. It has 4 legs. It stands with the 4 legs. And it has 2 eyes. The ears will be on the side and it is very sharp. And your tail is there. So likewise, all the organisms, it has to be described correctly. Then only they can give a proper name in the nomenclature. So for giving nomenclature, for naming the organism that is used all over the world, we need proper description. It should be described correctly. So that is what for naming the organism, it has to be described. It is like this. It functions like this. So all these things have to be said correctly. And this is called as identification. So for naming the organism, we are giving some description. It looks like this. It looks like that. The color is like this. So we are giving one description. So that description only is called as identification. Identification. And for plants, so for identifying the plants, for naming, nomenclature, naming the plants, and for identifying them, scientific names are given. So based on this, naming the plant so that they can be called all over the world with the same name and described correctly, identified correctly. So these are the things are made to give scientific names to the organisms. Why these things are made? Why we are naming the organism? So that everyone can call that. Why are we naming them based on their description? So all these things are done to create one scientific name. So that is only we are going to see now. So scientific names, so those type of scientific names I told you know. So those scientific names for plants, it is for plants we are talking about. For plants, the scientific names are based on the principles and criteria which are provided in ICDN. So what ICDN? ICDN, it is an organization. So what it does is they give scientific names to the plants based on their description. They have certain rules. That ICDN, they are an organization. They have certain rules to name the plants. So what they do, they follow all those principles and criteria, and based on the appearance of the plant, they name all the plants that are identified. So that is the work of ICDN. So giving scientific names to the plants based on their description, and they have certain rules and criteria. ICDN. So the full form of ICDN is International Code for Botanical Nomenclature. International Code for Botanical Nomenclature. ICDN. International Code for Botanical. Botanical here means plants. Nomenclature. Okay, for plants we are naming. It is the ICDN names all the name of the plants, and they give scientific names so that all over the world they can call by the same names. So what about animals? Who does the naming for animals? It is done by ICZN. ICZN. ICZN means International Code for Zoologicals. Here zoological means animals. Zoological nomenclature. International Code for Zoological Nomenclature. ICZN. International Code for Zoological. Zoological means animals. Nomenclature. So these are the two organizations who name the plants and animals. So plants are for ICBN and for animals it is ICZN. And biologists follow accepted principles to provide scientific names to the organisms. So biologists are nothing but who names the plants and animals, the people who are in ICBN and ICZN. So what they do, they are like I already told you, they will have certain principles to name the organism. So we will be discussing about the rules later. So they will have certain principles and rules, and based on that principles only, the scientific names will be given. So these are the things about the naming of organisms. So I hope you have got an idea about how the naming of organism works. Now I am going to give you a short recap from the first. We first talk what is biodiversity. So bio means all the living forms, all the living organisms. Diversity means different types of organisms. Studying about the different types of organisms are called as biodiversity, and the number of known species ranges from 1.7 to 1.8 million, and this is known as biodiversity. Why? Because different types of organisms are present, so that is why it is called as biodiversity. The number and types of organisms present on the earth. So biodiversity deals with how many number of organisms present on the earth and how many types of, what are the different types of organisms that are present on the earth. So we should standardize the naming of living organisms such that the particular organism is known by the same name all over the world. So all over the world, a particular organism, any one organism, it has to be named the same all over the world. So we should standardize some principles for naming such things. So that is only called as nomenclature. So naming in a standardized manner, any organism should be named so that it can be called all over the world. It's called as nomenclature, and the nomenclature or naming of organisms is possible only when they are described correctly. So the organism has to be described correctly, then only they can give a proper name to that organism or nomenclature. And this describing correctly is known as identification. So identifying the organism correctly, then only we can give name or nomenclature. So for naming the plants, for giving the scientific names for the plants based on principles and criteria which are provided in ICBN. So ICBN only names all the plants, they give scientific names based on certain principles. So ICBN means International Code for Botanical Nomenclature, and ICZN means International Code for Zoological Nomenclature. And what this ICZN does is, they only gives name to the animals. So for plants ICBN is there, for animals ICZN is there. And biologists follow accepted principles. Accepted means already someone would have been said, and it will be accepted by many scholars. So such principles to provide scientific names to the organisms. So the people on ICBN and ZN, what they do, they follow certain accepted principles, and based on that only they give scientific names. Now we were seeing about what is scientific names. So why should we give the scientific name and who are the organizations, the ICPN, ICZN. So those are the organizations who give naming for plants and animals. So we are talking about scientific names again and again. So now we are going to see what is scientific name, how does it look. So what are the principles that are being formulated to make a scientific name, so that we are going to see now. So there are two components in a scientific name. One is generic name and the other is specific epithet. One is generic name and the other is specific epithet. So now we are taking mango as an example. So you can see two words here. So this is the binomial of mango. Mangifera indica. Mangifera indica. So here Mangifera is the generic name. Mangifera is the generic name and indica is the specific epithet. Indica is the specific epithet. So it is also called as genus name and species name. Mangifera is known as genus name and indica is known as the species name. So any scientific name for any organism, you may take animals also, you may take plants also, you can take human beings also. So all will have two components like this: generic name and the specific epithet, the genus name and the species name. So both the names will be there. So these are the two components of a scientific name. So why we are using this scientific name means, for example, we are taking mango. So mango is said in English. So in Tamil it is said as mamaram, and in Hindi is said as aam. So based on our language, the name of the mangoes vary. But here, if you see this scientific name, if you in India also, it is Mangifera indica only. If you go to some other part of the world and tell it Mangifera indica, they will know that it is mango only. So to avoid the language barriers, if you go to China and tell mamaram, they do not know. In their language only, they know what is mango means. So likewise, to avoid all these language barriers, the scientific name was brought about. So wherever we go, we can use this scientific name to identify the organism. So that is why scientific name is given. And the system of providing a name with two components are said to be binomial nomenclature. So naming any scientific name with two components. Two components. So naming the organism with two components are said to be binomial nomenclature. Binomial nomenclature. So bi means two. Nomial, naming the organism. Nomenclature, by two. Using two components to name any organism. Binomial nomenclature. And the naming system is given by Carolus Linnaeus. The naming system is given by Carolus Linnaeus. So Carolus Linnaeus only found up this binomial nomenclature. That is to name the scientific name with generic name and species name. To identify any organism, it has to need a generic name and a species name. So that was said by Carolus Linnaeus. So he is one famous taxonomist. So taxonomists are nothing but who deals on the naming of plants, on identifying any organisms and classifying them. So those are the things done by taxonomists. So Carolus Linnaeus only, he was a famous taxonomist. So he only brought about the binomial nomenclature and it is practiced by biologists all over the world. So all over the world, the biologists have been practicing this binomial nomenclature, which was developed by Carolus Linnaeus. And it is impossible to study all the organisms. So we cannot study all the organisms because it is impossible. Why? Because the number is like that. If it is in tens, if it is in hundreds, or if it is in thousand, there is no problem. We can learn them one by one. If it is in lakhs also, it's okay. But in the earth, there are 1.7 to 1.8 million organisms. So you should imagine the number, how many species are on the earth. So these are the number of known species alone. So here there is a huge category that was not unknown. So that was unknown. So you should imagine so many organisms are there. So we cannot learn them one by one. It is really impossible. So to overcome this barrier, it is necessary to devise some means to make it possible. So we should find some ways to make this impossible possible. So we should study all the organisms, but there should be a way to study them easily. So for that only classification was brought about. Classification was brought about. So classification means we will categorize all the organisms according to their character. So that is only grouping of all the organisms based on the characteristics is called as classification. So we cannot study one by one of them. If they are grouped together based on their same characteristics, we can learn them in group, then it will be very easier. So for that only classification was brought about. So classification is the process by which anything is grouped into convenient categories based on easily observable characters. So classification means it is the process by which any organism is grouped. It is being grouped into convenient categories based on some categories and easily observable characteristics. So if you take any organism, the character that is easily observable, external we can tell. So such characters are taken, and based on that the organisms are being classified. So like this only classification is made for all the organisms. So for example, we are taking a set of organisms from the roadside. So the human beings are there, some plants may be there, and dogs may be there, cats may be there. So we are taking them. So now we are going to group them. First we will take human beings. So we are putting them under the human being category. And you take dog. So does it look similar to the human being? No. Even though some features are similar, they stand on four legs and they walk. The body structure itself will be different from human beings. So externally they were different. So what we do, we place them under the animal category. And you can find trees. Does it look similar to the human being and the dog? No. It is totally different. So what we do, that tree is kept under a different category. So like this only all the organisms are taken, and based on the characters, external characters, whether it is plant, what kind of plant it is. So in plants still we would have learned about climbers, creepers, herbs. So based on those are also classification only. So they are being categorized based on their growth. And if you take animals also, domestic animals are there. So that is one category. So those that are being living in house and pet animals are known as domestic animals, and they give useful to the mankind. And the wild animals that are in the wildlife, so those are coming under the category wild animals. So like this only classification is made. So now I think you have an idea about what is classification. Now I will give you a short recap from the first. So first we saw the two components of a scientific name, that is generic name and specific epithet. Then we took an example of mango, Mangifera indica. So this Mangifera is the generic name and indica is the specific epithet. It is Mangifera is also called as species generic name, and indica it is denoted as species name. So these are other names. So Mangifera is the genus name and indica is the species name. So we saw the two components and what are them. The system of providing two components, a scientific name, if it has two components, then they are said to be binomial nomenclature. So bi means two, nomenclature means naming the organism. Then this binomial nomenclature was found by Carolus. So this method, binomial nomenclature, it is practiced by biologists, that is persons in ICB and ICZL. So those are the biologists who are related to the living organisms, studying about them. So those biologists are following this Carolus Linnaeus binomial nomenclature all over the world. So this is one of the most famous system for naming the organism till now. And Carolus Linnaeus, he is a taxonomist who involves in classification and naming of organisms. So to study all the organisms one by one, that is to study all the organisms, the 1.7 to 1.8 million species, it is very difficult. So there has to be some ways to make it possible. So for that only, to overcome that difficulty only, classification was brought about. So classification means it is nothing but grouping the organisms based on their observable characters, easily observable character. If you see any organism, the external character that is observed. So based on that, all the organisms are grouped into. So these are the things about the scientific name and classification. And here if you see means the scientific name, the first word, that is the genus name, should be always in the capital letter, and species name should be in small letter. So if you are writing in exam, if you are writing any binomial name, you should write the first word as capital letter, the genus name, and species name should start with the smaller letter. So all these scientific names will be in the language of Latin only. So this is a Latin language. Now I am going to tell you about taxa. So taxa, so this will be a new term for you. It is all related to classification only. So now we will see what is taxa now. So taxa indicates the categories at different levels. So taxa means it indicates the category, what type of group does it belong to. It indicates the category, what group does it belong to. Like that it indicates, that is what is called as taxa. So I will tell you an example now. Plants, weed. So these are one type of taxa. So plants means what you will think? You will think about all the different types of plants. You do not think about animals. You will think only about the plants that you know. Wheat. So wheat is a variety of plant. So now you will think about only the wheat and not rice or barley or anything. We will think about wheat only. So wheat is one taxa, but any name or any grouping name, that is what is called as taxa. So plants, wheat, rice, then these are the things, these are one type of taxa. Then next is animals. So animals means what you will think? You will think only about the different animals that you know. Mammals. So mammals are animals that give birth. So we will think about all those mammals. So human is also a mammal only. So we will think of that is nomenclature, identification and classification. Then what taxa does? So it is help to classify all the organisms by different taxa, that is plants, animals, insects. So we call like that. Those are also taxa only. So we use taxa to classify the organisms. So this is called as taxonomy. What is it called as? Taxonomy. So I will tell you the definition of taxonomy. It is a branch of study where all living organisms are classified into various groups based on their characteristics. So what happens in taxonomy? So it is the branch of study where what they will do, they will take all the living organisms and it is grouped, it is classified into various groups based on their characteristics. So I already told you, based on the external observable characters, it has been classified, it has been grouped. So likewise in taxonomy, what happens? A living group of living organisms is taken and it is being classified according to their characteristics. So this is known as the study of this is known as taxonomy. So classifying all the organisms comes under the branch. So this is one branch of study called taxonomy. Why taxa? Because we use taxas with categories. It is used to indicate categories. We use taxas to classify. So it is called as taxonomy. On what basis does the classification happen is according to the principle of identification, nomenclature and classification. So first we saw how it is classified. So it is classified based on the characteristics and on basis of what is, they have some principles. So like we already saw in ICDN, ICCN. So what they do, they have some accepted principles to classify the organisms. Likewise in taxonomy also, they have certain principles to classify all the organisms and group them. So according to the principle, the classification is made and identification. So how it is identified, how it is named and how it is classified. So these are the three things that are used for classifying under taxonomy. So now you know what is taxonomy and how they classify all the organisms. So all the living organisms are put into various groups based on the characteristics and the principle of identification, nomenclature and classification. The next topic that we are going to see is systematics. Here it deals with diversity of organisms and their comparative evolutionary relationship and grouping of organisms at every level of classification, right from species to kingdom. So what they said is systematic means it deals with diversity of organisms. Diversity means different types of organisms. Diversity is nothing but different organisms in the world. That is called as diversity. So it deals with all the different types of organisms and their comparative evolutionary relationship. So how they have been formed from the origin of any species, how the plant has come, how the animals have been originated. So what type of background history does it have? So that is called as the evolutionary relationship. So dealing about all these subjects and comparing the organisms with one another and grouping it. So comparing the organisms and seeing their background, the history, the evolutionary relationship of the organism and grouping the organism. So how they are grouping to every level of classification. So they are classifying from species to kingdom. That is, they have a hierarchy from the kingdom to the species. So stage by being classified, and in each stage the organisms are being placed. So this is called as systematic. So systematically arranging the organisms based on these characteristics, that is the comparative evolutionary relationship and grouping of organisms, and placing from the level of classification. It has each level. So from the species to the kingdom, it has been classified like each stage it has been classified. So this is only called as systematics. Now I will give you a short recap from the first. First we saw what is taxa. Taxa means it indicates the categories at different levels, and we saw the different types of taxa, that is plants and weed. These are two types of taxa. This is one example. Then animals, mammals, dogs. These are one group of taxa. So each one is a taxa. This taxa includes all the animals. This mammals includes all the mammal type of animals. So dogs means all the different breeds of dogs are brought under dogs. So these are the taxa, for example. Then all organisms can be classified by different taxas. So using different types of taxas, all the organisms are being grouped or classified. So this is known as taxonomy. Taxonomy means it is the branch of study where all living organisms are classified into various groups. They are being put into various groups based on their characteristics, based on their different external characteristics, and according to the principle of identification about the features of the plant or the animal, about the different characteristics, the external behavior. And nomenclature means the naming of the organism and classification. So based on these three only, the taxonomy classifies all the living organisms. And the next we saw about systematic. So it deals with the diversity of organisms, different type of organisms, and about their comparative. So comparing different types of organisms with one another, and evolutionary relationship, how the organism have been originated. So what are the evolutionary changes that has been happened? What is the background of the organism and everything? And grouping of organism. At every level of classification, they are put at each level of classification from species to the kingdom. So these are all about systematics.
I have explained to you about the each category of the classification, each hierarchy classification of the uh, classification. So now you can see. So like I already told you, from species how it has been arranged finally to the kingdom. So first the lowest basic unit is the species, and after above that genus and family, order, class, phylum, and kingdom. So like this only all the living organisms are being arranged. So this is the order of all the hierarchy of classification.